purpose of the CABs, Capital Access Boulevard, and the CABs we have formatted to do them on a quarterly basis. The purpose of the CAB is to help entrepreneurs understand how they can raise capital directly themselves, and it always starts with an investor-grade business plan. I don't care where you want to get money from. If you don't have a business plan, because there's some thought leaders out there who are going through this, you don't need a business plan anymore. I don't know anyone, and we have a couple of people through the panel today that will talk to you about this. I don't know anyone who has the capital, will give it to you if you don't have a plan. So it's one thing to have a business plan. It's a whole nother thing who your audience is for what you have in that business plan. Bankers want particular information. Investors want different information. So you have to write your business plan to the audience that you're speaking to. One of the missions of iBOSS is to help young companies, startup companies, new entrepreneurs coming into this space of wanting to raise capital. Our mission is to help you not only understand how to raise capital, but what is the right capital for you? Platforms that we sanction as being okay. So for instance, your Indiegogos, your Kickstarters, things of that nature, those are crowdfunding. Indiegogo and Kickstarter, you cannot do equity investments in them. You do what's called reward-based or donation-based. So the SEC did legislation that said, now we will allow equity investments, and here are the things that has to happen in order for that to happen. But that hasn't been passed yet. And it hasn't been passed yet because the states still have a big issue with that. Every state has their own security regulations. And the states say, if you go through this and now all of a sudden all these unaccredited investors can invest, who's watching over them? Nobody can protect them. It becomes like the Wild West. So the SEC still has not passed that legislation because there really is a big pushback from the states. And there's other legislations that's not. But when you hear someone talking about crowdfunding, because there is this sort of confusion going on as to exactly not only what is crowdfunding, but what's legal, what's not legal. And to add to it, there are about 13 states that have now enacted their own crowdfunding legislation. So the waters really get muddy, because when a state has a crowdfunding regulation, that means only if you're in that state, and you can only sell to people in that state. And so now all of a sudden, people who do not understand, it has variations to it, but it's intrastate. So that totally takes away from what you're thinking about crowdfunding. You can't put it up on the website because on the website now you're advertising to people outside of your state. So now you have general $100,000. So be very careful when you think about crowdfunding. Now, the flip side of that is you'll also see a lot of information in the papers about how crowdfunding is doing a phenomenal job in companies raising capital, and it is. But that's the different definition, and that is it still fits under the umbrella of crowdfunding. So I just say all that to say you got to be really careful when you're hearing about these different vehicles, because nothing has changed in the regulatory world on how you can raise capital. There are only two legal ways to raise capital. Let me finish this one point. There are only two legal ways to raise capital. One, you have to register your offering with the Securities Authority in order to sell interest in your company to the public. Or two, you have to utilize one of the exemptions in order to sell securities in your company to the public. There is no in-between. Factors that go into you sort of fitting in a space that makes sense for you to raise capital. So for instance, if you were just going to be a lifestyle business, lifestyle businesses are businesses that you make enough revenue for your lifestyle, but you're really not creating anything to move further. You are not going to get one investor interested in providing capital. So if that's the case, then please have at it. Do crowdfunding where it's donation-based or reward-based, because there may be some mission to what it is that you're doing. But on the flip side, if you're doing a business that your model will allow you to have an exit strategy of an IPO, that means you're growing a business that is going to be really a high growth business that you can make some significant revenue. Now all of a sudden you're doing something that an investor could be very much interested in. In that respect, again, IPO is the exit, but along the way you can raise capital through a private placement or direct public offering or some of any of those vehicles. And then there's those companies in between that maybe their exit is that eventually they want to have an acquisition. They want to be acquired by someone else. And what a lot of people don't think about, when you're building your business plan, you got to build your exit strategy in your business plan, because you build to your exit, right? So that company that may be an acquisition candidate, well, you can have a strategy of debt and investments. So it depends on who you are, what you have, what you're doing, what your exit is, for you to figure out what vehicles make sense for you. And so the reason I did the assessment, again, is so you can go through that. It will score you and then give you an idea of what kind of vehicles you should be looking at. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah.
Any other questions on that? So again, there are different vehicles to utilize to raise capital. You need to know who you are, what you're doing, how you're doing it, so you know which vehicle makes sense for you. A lot of entrepreneurs run around trying to raise capital, but they're knocking on the absolute wrong doors. Well, you are going to be exhausted, and the people doors that you're knocking on, you know, by the time you walk out the door, it's in the round file. If you're going to an investor and you didn't do your research, and this investor, you could just go to their website and clearly see that he says he only invests in technology companies, and you have to have an EBITDA of $1 million, and here you are, a startup, and you're sending it into them, and they've already told you, we don't even invest in early stage seed capital. Do your research, know who it is, and again, in today's market, because of the Jobs Act, you have the ability to put together a marketing program that allows you to market yourself directly to the type of capital that makes sense. You raise capital in tranches. You raise your first $1 million, you get these things done. 12, 18 months later, you raise another $1 million for the other things. So generally, a company, especially a startup company, is going to go through 3 tranches of raising capital.